So we'll just start off by uh, talking about your names, saying and spelling your first and last name, and then we'll just go from there. So if you'd like to go first.
I'm Alice McDonald, AlicemcDonald.
And I'm Richard Kraft. I'm Alice's son, and Richard and Craft.
I'm Jay Alexander, JayAlexander, and Alice McDonald is my aunt.
Okay. I want to just take a moment here and have you all dive a little bit more into your genealogy of kind of who your parents are and kind of how you got to this area. But let's.
I was born and raised here. My mother came from Oklahoma and homesteaded in 1916. And my father came from Kansas by way of World War I and then here to Colorado. So he was from Kansas, mother was from Oklahoma.
And his name was Harvey?
Harvey.
And what was
her name was Roland.
Okay.
And I was born in Los Angeles, but I would I'm the son of Alice, and so that's how I got associated with the dryer.
And my father, Harvey J. Craig Jr., and Alice are brother and sister. And so I was also born in Los Angeles, but it had always been my desire to retire in Manzanola. And so I too came every summer when I was a child, and now I'm here.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you, all three of you, for being here. I really appreciate it. So, we're here to just talk about the dry and what that is. So, for people who have no idea, would you tell us about what the dry is?
Well, there were two women who lived in Rocky Ford, and they came from, I think, the Kansas or Missouri area with the Swinks. And after they were here, Swink was a farmer and a rancher in the valley, and he told them to find blacks who would like to own land and tell them to come here to Colorado and homestead. And it was one of the last homestead acts, and so they went around the country and talked to people and visited with people and encouraged the blacks to move to Colorado under the Homestead Act. That is how my mother's family heard about Colorado through the sisters. And my mother's mother was a teacher. She was at a meeting and they were there talking to the people. Told them about Colorado, so they decided they would come. They were sharecroppers there in Oklahoma and probably would never have had an opportunity to own land, and that is what they wanted to do. So that was the main reason they came to Colorado to homestead in 1916. Grandmother Craig came from Nicodemus, Kansas, and she came in 1915 to homestead. And she had taught for a number of years in the Nicodemus area and Hillside and Bogan and all that area. But in 1915, she and her family came here to Colorado to homestead also.
Okay, and so kind of a long line of teachers in your family.
Yes.
And what was the occupation of Harvey, your father?
He was a farmer rancher. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the dry is important for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons is that it's kind of, one of two black homestead communities that are, really talked about here in Colorado, one being Deerfield and the other one being the Dry. And so the Dry started after Deerfield, and, it ended before Deerfield ended. So can you kind of talk about, the duration of the Dry, kind of like why it ended or what didn't work?
Well, it ended because when the people were told to come and homestead, they told them it was good fertile land. And so they thought, well, if it's good fertile land, it's going to be good for farming, and that is what they knew how to do, was to farm. However, in Oklahoma, it's green rolling hills, and there were streams, and there was water. In Kansas, actually there's more water in Kansas, and they get more moisture than we do here in Colorado. They didn't know that at the time. So, thinking that the land would be much like what they were leaving, they were ready and willing to come, and did come. However, I remember Mother saying when they arrived here at Manzanola, why her father saw a man at the Highline ditch, and he was dipping water and putting it into barrels on his wagon. And so he asked him how to get to the dry. And the man looked at him and he said, you know, mister, he said, you don't want to come here. You don't want to stay here. And he said, well, yes, I do. He said, I have nowhere to go. I left my Oklahoma. I was a sharecropper there. This is going to be my home, so how do I get to the dry? So he told him, well, keep heading south. And so they went along in their wagon, pulled by their horses, until they went over a rise, and they stopped and looked. And my mother said you could see for 100 miles. Nothing but flat prairie, no trees, cactus. And as they looked around, not even any wildlife. They didn't see a rabbit or a bird. She said it was quiet and still, and this rolling, flat, dry land. And she said she actually cried because it just was not what she had thought they would find at all. And I think that that was probably the feeling that so many of the homesteaders had, but they were here, and they decided, well, we'll make the best of it. And so they went on out and found homesteads and staked their claims to make their homes here in Colorado. The intent was to have irrigation. So after the people came and they settled, why, they worked along with Swink, and they put in an irrigation system on the Pishopaw at the headwaters. You have to cross Highway 10 and go further south. And they, with their horses and their teams and their shovels and by hand, they put in canals and built a dam and filled it. And that was probably in 1923 that they finished this dam. And they had the flood. And they felt like probably it was dirt filled, and with the fact that they had filled it and it hadn't had a chance to really tighten up, and the animals hadn't been through and tamped it down, that it broke loose, and a big hole broke into the side, and the water they had in it rushed away with the storm water that poured through, and that was the end of the dam. And of course the people were disillusioned and had put in so much effort and realized that it just was not going to be a place to make a living. So they started moving away. And then of course we had the 29 failure of the economic system and the Dust Bowl, and it was called the Dirty 30s. And the dust came and it was thick and heavy, and sometimes you would look out and you couldn't even see the sun. It was no difference in day and night. The dust poured into the little old houses that they had built, and they had to tamp in rags or paper or whatever they had to keep the dust out. And with those things happening, the people who had come to Homestead, many of them saw no future in staying there, and so they left and they went into the city. Some went to Lahana, some went to Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Denver. They moved away. But our family stayed. My grandmother and her husband and mom and dad and my mother's family. So there were a few families that stayed. The Bruces stayed and remained there until they died and left the dry. But the bulk of the families left.
When I've done my own research on the dry, and I've heard of you all making dugout houses and things like that.
Some of the people who came, it was cold and winter was coming on, and there were no trees, there was no lumber. And so they made dugouts, and they would dig down into the ground, and you could use a few sticks that they could locate to make a shelter over it, and you were down in the ground. And that was how they lived. They were familiar with dugouts because the people that came in Nicodemus had dugouts there also. However, it was funny because my mother's family got here, and it was in May, and so it was a pleasant time of the year. And there were people living in dugouts, and they told her father, Henry, they said, well, we'll come up and help you to make a dugout. And he said, no, no, no. I'm not a rabbit, and I'm not living in the ground. So he said, surely there's some place where I can get some lumber. So they told him that, well, there was a town there in Fowler. So he went across to Fowler and was able to get some lumber. And he built a little 2-room house, and they helped him build his house. So people had started getting lumber and building houses, but the first ones that came, that arrived in September, did not have time to find wood to build homes, so they did make dugouts.
Wow. That's just wild to just think about think about all that, compared to now. Well, so do you think, because it was George Swink and then Josephine and
Lenora.
Lenora Rucker trying to recruit people, and so do you think there's any because there's an aspect of trickery a little bit, trying to say this land was, bountiful and flourishing, and really that time.
Well, they said it was fertile.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was trickery. I think that there was a vision, and they knew it was dry land, but they also had this idea, and they did do it, was to build the dam and have the irrigation system. It failed, but it was accomplished, and they had a run of water, and this man had planted a wheat field right next to my grandmother's property, and when they they opened the head gates and the water came down, and he was able to irrigate this wheat field, and all the people went that was to look and see the first irrigation that came down through the canal and onto his wheat field, and knew that it could be done. And I think that at that time they felt like they would have been able to irrigate the land. In hindsight, people look now and they say, well, the Pishopaw was really not a large enough stream of water to have done the irrigation, and now it's just a little trickle coming down. So with the change in the climate and the drought and the dryness, it probably would not have irrigated a large amount of land. But it was a dream, and they had some deep water wells, and they had made some lakes for reservoirs to hold the water. So it wasn't trickery, it was a dream.
Yeah, it was a vision that
And
just didn't really work out. Okay.
And it didn't work out.
And listening to my mother too, it was an opportunity for these people to own their own land, because before they were either slaves or they were sharecroppers. But this was an opportunity where they could have their own land, because I think with the Homestead Act, if you had that land and you made improvements on it, you got to keep it. So that was part of it also, that people said, oh, we could have our own land, have our own house and farm.
I've come across that story before of the first field being irrigated, and read about how just, that was a big deal that people really came around to watch that, and so that's a great story there. Well, and so at the height of the dry, what was there? What were there? Some schools? Was there?
No, they had a 1-room schoolhouse, and it was west of where we lived. It was across the road from the Rucker homestead, and they had this 1-room schoolhouse, and the people who had children went to the school. Now, when my mother came, she was 18 and had gone to school in Oklahoma, so she went to school here in Manzanola, and she was the first black student in Manzanola. And she lived with the family. One of the teachers that was at the school and his wife took her in, and she would live with them during the week and go to school, and then she would go home on weekends, and she had a little pony with a carriage to take her back and forth. And she graduated from Manzanola High School in 1923. And but the younger students went to school in the one-room schoolhouse on the Dry, and Grandmother Craig was the teacher, and she taught all grade levels, which she had done in Kansas, so it was a cakewalk for her to do that again here. And I think they probably was enough students, and she taught maybe in 1930, 31, in that vicinity somewhere.
And this is Lulu Craig?
Lulu was the teacher, uh-huh.
And can you talk a little bit about her? Because I know we have some oral histories of her in our collection as well. Can you just talk about her a little bit?
Well, Lulu came from Nicodemus and had lived there for a number of years. And she went to school in Graham County and went to school with George Washington Carver and knew him well. And I don't know exactly, she probably taught there in Nicodemus maybe 25 years. And then she came here in 1915 and homesteaded her land and taught school there out on the Dry until there were no children left for her to teach. But then she remained living there, and they were farmers and ranchers also.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like just a really tight-knit, strong community, because it was around like 50 families, correct?
Well, at one time, I would say there probably were that many. Many of them knew one another. They, the group that came from Kansas knew one another, and my mother's family came from Oklahoma, and there was another family named the Jacksons that came. So they came sort of in groups. So families knew families, and once they got here, they all got acquainted, and everybody reached out to try to help the other one get established on his homestead. And they wanted to make it work, so they worked together. Did not happen, but their intentions were good, and they wanted to have a good, strong community. And I would say there probably was possibly 50 families, and they would gather together and have picnics and socials and light together at my grandmother's house, and sometimes they would just come and she would read something, and they would discuss books, and they were, yes, they were a close-knit group of people.
And your mother's maiden name was Craig or Dixon?
Dixon.
Or Dixon.
My mother's maiden name was Dixon. She married Harvey Craig, who was Lulu's son. Lulu's son.
Then I was looking back, and they had, was it a book club? Or they had a club, but I
Right.
was reading some historical notes. And,
Right.
and that was interesting to me because I didn't know. And she says, oh yeah, they would.
Are you talking the reading club that, yeah.
Yes, grandmother was well-versed and well-read, and brought a lot to, not only to the children, but to the adults that were there. And they did reading and discussions.
Wow.
But they had
And,
like presidents and secretary, and they had notes. Somebody
Oh,
took
it is
notes.
like a cabinet, like a real official like
Yeah.
reading club
I thought-
in the Dry. Wow. Huh. And where do you say you came across that?
Was it in the Bible or? I can't remember. It was some of the papers that she had that I was looking through.
No, that's really cool. Well, and so yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective, as kind of the younger generation, because I'm sure how old were you all when you all guys were running around the Dry?
When I was there, I was school age.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
I've seen pictures in different photo albums where I was as young as 3, going out to spend time
Okay.
with Gramps and Grandpa on the Dry. But every summer.
Every summer. Well, so yeah, we'll just talk a little bit about that.
Well,
So
for
what
me, it was
like?
always fun. After hearing my mother talk about her growing up, it wasn't fun. It was hard. But for me, every time I went, it was always fun. It wasn't, everything that we did was fun. And it was only, too, for that short period of time. She lived her whole life out there.
Mm-hmm.
And, she had to get up early and do chores and go to school and then come back and do chores. And it was, and she was there with the change of the weather, of the seasons. I'm there during summer when it's really nice and you don't have all the change of seasons, and um, all the things that she had to do was just really, it wasn't that easy. For me, it was just fun.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how my memories are. It was always fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably was spoiled by my grandparents
You
too.
were. And you're right. I mean, just hearing Aunt Al, who I call Mom Alice, hear her talking about growing up and just some of the stories I was able to hear from my dad, but most of it comes from Mama Alice and just living the life. And for us, it was more like living the dream, you know, because we went in the summer and it was a chance to spend time with Grams and Grandpa, but to see all of our cousins, you know, all come in from different places at different times, and being able to have those opportunities to spend time together and to grow up together, and the little chores that we did. I mean, Grams always made them fun. I mean, we all learned how to make fly swatters. We all learned how to make slingshots, how to make stilts, kites,
corncob pipes, mud ponds,
fishing poles,
button spinners.
yeah,
Yep.
torches, because every summer the fire ants would come.
Yes.
And so, I mean, our experience, I think the hardest thing for me being out there was having to use the outhouse, you know. That was the hardest thing. During the day, you know, it was the outhouse. Once it got dark, it was, you could use the in-house, but, you know, for them, I mean, they grew up without plumbing, you know, and so Rich is right. For us, it was a completely different experience than actually being birthed on the dry, growing up on the dry, and then moving into your adult life afterwards.
Well, yeah, that's so funny. Like you said, like, you know, you didn't understand or really comprehend like how hard it was to enjoy your playground. So you're just playing in it where years like, I built this. I made it.
Yeah.
Because even when we went with Grandpa to town every day for water, that was an adventure for us, you know.
Yeah.
For them, I mean, it was
life or death.
life or death.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and by the time they got there, they had a pickup and a tank. But with us, we had the
Wagon.
team of horses and the wagon with barrels on it. And we had to haul water every day, sometimes twice a day, depending on how hot it was and how much water the cattle were drinking. And we would have to go, we could go to the well, which was probably 3 miles away, or you could go down to the ditch, but whatever way wherever you went, you had to dip it with a bucket and fill your barrels and bring it back and put it into the tank. Now during the summer months, we'd let the cattle go, and they would go to water and drink themselves, but that meant we had to get on horseback and track them down at the end of the day to get them back in so we could milk them, you know.
Wow. Well, so you all didn't experience any of that, or with the farming, just all play, right?
And then of course they had electric lights at that time. I left in 1956 to go away to college, and at that time we still were using lamps. We still had the outhouse. We still did not have a phone. Those things came after I had moved away and gone away to college. And of course, with the improvements that they had, whenever I'd come back, things were better. But that was the existence. So by the time the children got there, it was much better.
Yeah. Oh, it was a playground at that point.
It was a bigger playground.
And we did have an Uncle Ralph. He was the husband of Viola Mitchell. He would saddle me up, and he still farmed. So we would go out and get the cattle, and he would show me how to milk. I could never do it. He had the little the stool and the bucket, and was trying to show me how to do it. I couldn't, and I went out with him a couple times when I was younger, but that was about it. That was more like fun and adventure.
Well, also, I mean, you know, from everything you guys are saying, you know, it was really close-knit community, but also your family's very close, very tight. And so was there, you know, that storytelling and really trying to impress on you like how important that the land that you're playing on really was? Like, was that known to you when you guys
Not
were
at the
growing up?
time. It doesn't realize to me until I start hearing my mother give talks and interviews where then I really hit home with me how important the land was, and the heritage, and I would like to have some type of monument or some type of recognition of the drive, because I know that like on Highway 350 where the Santa Fe Trail goes, they have like plaques that talk about certain areas of the Santa Fe Trail. So I was hoping I had that if we could have some type of plaque or memorial to bring recognition of the drive and the importance of it.
And I know for me, having had the opportunity to experience some of Graham's interviews that she did, you know, and back then children were still seen and not heard. And so there would be times when we'd be sitting and the grown folks would be talking, you know, and you'd hear little things. And I think that as I got older, I had more awareness because it was our family that was still there. Some of the other families that they talked about, they were long gone. And as I've grown forward in my life's journey, being able to hear Mama Alice, as Rich said, just share so much with us, because every time we've come down as adults, she's been the one that's loaded up the avalanche and take us out on the prairie and, you know, just recite that oral history, point out landmarks. And, you know, there are times when you have your own kids or your own distractions and maybe you're not hearing the story, but as I grow older, the telling and the hearing of the story, the value and the impact of it also increases. And so being able to hear it, to know that you guys are here to record it, it'll help us continue to pass down that story, that history, that legacy to the ones that are coming up after us, because now we're aging into the old folks quicker than we thought. And so it is important, and she's been a valuable resource. And, you know, with Rich moving back to Manzanola and just spending so much time with Mama Alice, he now has so much knowledge and such a wealth of information that he's always willing to share. And so now there's 4 of us cousins that are here. Rich is here, I'm here. My cousin Marguerite, she moved down first from California, and that's Flora May's daughter, the oldest sibling of the 3 of them. Our cousin Michael lives right down the street, and so the more of us that move back, the more the other cousins are like, we got to get there, we got to get there. So we're hoping more and more will come.
Okay. Very cool. No, that, like you said, you know, it's all about legacy and really highlighting things that history has forgotten for whatever reason. And the Drive is the perfect example of that, where, you know, people coming from Oklahoma, from all over, these exodusters came here, you know, to this opportunity, you know, to, you know, make, it's the American dream, going out west to make your own land, you know, to have it and be your own man, be self-sufficient. And this was an example of them, you know, against all the odds, really trying to do that, and then just kind of, you know, man versus nature, and nature just kind of got the better of us with this drought and how dry it was. I want to ask about racism in the Dry, because I've heard some stories that are very interesting and kind of hard to believe, and so I just want to talk to you about kind of the racial makeup, or was there any racial tension in the Dry?
No, there wasn't. The racial makeup, there on the homestead there was the blacks that moved, but there were also white homesteaders that were in the area. And of course here in the valley, there were the farmers that had the big farms and were under the irrigation were all white farmers. And when the homesteaders came, they welcomed them and they turned to one another, because the blacks that came were farmers and were willing to work. And so they worked on the farms and ranches that they had, and the whites were glad to have them and reached out to help them, and it would help with getting wood out to the Dry so they could build their homes. So it was a good relationship. They were all working and trying to to survive, and racism was not a problem at all. There may have been people with racist feelings, but it was not a problem. It didn't rise its ugly head. Where there was Ku Klux Klan in this area, and of course Colorado has always been full of the Klan members. They had a Klan group here. One night my father had gone into town and was coming home, and his little old car broke down. And so he knew all the farmers in the valley, so he thought, well, I'll stop and I'll walk over here and see if someone will help me. Well, when he got to a couple of houses, there was no one at home. So he said, well, I'll just leave it there and I'll walk home, and I'll come back in the morning and get the car. So he started walking home, and as he walked, he could see a glow in the sky, and he thought, that's odd. And it wasn't the moon, but he kept on walking, and when he reached a distance there, he saw a group of men on horseback and in their robes and their hoods. So it was a Klan group, and they were having a meeting, and they were burning their torches and riding the horses quickly. And he kept on walking, and so one of the fellows rode up to him, and he said, Harv, is that you? And Dad said, yeah. And he said, what's the matter? And he said, oh, my car broke down. And he said, I went to a couple of you fellows' houses. There was nobody at home. And he said, oh, we're out here having a little meeting. Where's your car? He said, it's down by so-and-so's house. And he said, well, he said, I can't help you right now because we're having this meeting. But he said, go ahead on home. And he said, don't just stay, and tomorrow I'll come and pick you up and bring you down, and we'll fix your car and get you going again. So Dad said, okay, and so he went on walking, and they went on with their little torch burning and meeting. Well, Dad knew them all, and of course they knew him. They were not ever in their group for the purpose of intimidating the black homesteaders. They never bothered them. I asked Mom, I said, well, did they have any activity? And she said a couple of times there was a man, and he was a white fellow that was abusive to his family, and they burned a cross on his lawn. And the superintendent had swatted a kid, and they didn't like that, and so they burned the cross on his lawn. But they never bothered the black community at all.
That's
So their purpose was not the same as it was in the South.
That's wild on a lot of different levels of just like, because you know, like, so History Colorado, I mean, we have the Klan ledgers that we digitize that actually have names and, you know, residents of former Klan members. And so, and even, you know, you're talking about, you know, your mom Roland coming from Oklahoma, was given the racial makeup of Oklahoma with the Tulsa, you know, 1921 Tulsa race massacre and things like that. And then to hear that, like, there's this, you know, black utopia in the 20s that had no, you know, that had Klan and had no racial tension. It's just, you know, a lot of those ideas are kind of juxtaposed, but it happened. So that's,
happens.
Yeah, that's that's really wild.
It happens because the black settlers worked for the farmers, and they had a good relationship.
Survival, yeah.
Survival. They were all trying to survive.
Even at school, my mother told a story that they'd get kids that weren't from this area, that maybe they were from the South, and they might call them names, but the other kids, local kids, would say, we don't do that here.
Wow.
And so a lot of times they would protect them or back them up.
That's great. That's really makes it sound like, you know, a proper utopia, you know, out here just of self-resilience, excuse me. Man, well, so why do you think, you know, there's the Dry and there's Deerfield. Why do you think Deerfield is still talked about where the Dry has kind of fallen out of history?
I don't think it's fallen out of history. I just think that people were not aware of it. They were aware of Deerfield because, number one, it was closer to Denver, which was a larger city, and that's where a large number of the people came from, and that's who the people at Deerfield related to. And they had there in Deerfield, they had a gas station, they had a restaurant. It was a town. The Dry was never a town. they did have the school, but that was the extent of it. They never had any stores, or they never had any shops, or they never opened any businesses. It never reached that point. So to most people, it was probably just a dry land community of people who were trying to survive. Whereas in Deerfield, they actually had established a little town effect, and it was a town, more or less.
Hmm.
Hi, love. How you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
I don't know if you guys are talking anymore. I just didn't know if we were still rolling or was it good?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you all can tell us? Just visiting some fond memories of hanging out at the dry of, this. I know you all were fairly young when you were there, but just any.
My mother took them fishing a lot, and there was one of the ranchers dug up. It was a good sized pond, and filled with water, and someone put fish in, and so there were quite a number of fish to be caught. So Mom would take the kids with their little poles, and they would go fishing. They did a lot of fishing, and they went fishing down on the river. Didn't you guys go
Yes.
to they fished on the river, and that was one of their enjoyable outings. I think they even went did you go to the Fisher Pond? Did Dad ever take you to the
Yes,
Fisher Pond Dam?
yes.
And they fished in that area. So that was one of their big activities, I know, was fishing.
Yes, if you catch them, you clean them.
Okay.
I was telling Mom Alice when we were driving out to Highway 10,
We went to Tempest.
went to Tempest, and she was showing me that's where you guys used to go a lot of the times to fish, and I just immediately got that memory, us being giddy with catching fish and then getting them home and then just glistening with the fish scales as we would, clean our fish. And so, I mean, there wasn't a bad memory. I mean, there's so many that stand out.
Yep. Horseback riding and chopping wood and eating. My grandmother really could cook. She was famous for cinnamon rolls and pancakes and gravy and chicken. You name it.
Man, yeah, I just love the different perspectives. How you guys, you just came there and played and ate and left, and you dug dugouts and hauled buckets of water. It's really great just to see that stark contrast. But now you guys taking those fond memories, and now since that's your memory, you want to. Like, you're invested in the legacy of the drive because of those, and because the familiar heritage you have there. So it tells a really neat story just of resilience and Black excellence, really, of them trying to envision this land as more than what it could be, and them just trying to make that happen. And some excavation has been done on the dry. By Michelle Slaughter here,
Yes.
And her team. I don't know if you want to pan over or not.
Yeah.
And so some of the things that have come from this are obviously some more attention to the dry, and there are some things found, some glass, a sheriff's badge. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, they found that in their study, and it was a little badge, and we haven't determined whether it belonged to Richie when he would come during the summer, or whether it belonged to my brother. It was old, so you can tell, and we weren't quite sure. But they found, I thought, really interesting artifacts, and they went to the Mitchells had built an adobe house, but when they first came to the drive, they had a little frame house further up on their land. And I was fascinated with the fact that they were able to determine where their coal bin had been, and the layout of the house and how many rooms, and they found glass and could determine the period. So I thought their study was fascinating for that reason. There's so much you can find out just by digging.
Yeah. Yeah, could we get into that a little bit, if you know, care to talk about some of that?
Oh my gosh. On the spot immediately.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, you know, we were really lucky, despite this area being not so far from the Dust Bowl, there was still just so much on the surface, which further east, you just don't find a lot of surface artifacts from that time period. So we were able to find a lot of stuff, like the sheriff's badge, just right on the ground. At your house is where we found the sheriff's badge, but right, the Mitchell homestead had just a wealth of artifacts on the surface, even more so than below ground. I think mainly because they had lived there in the dugout initially, left, and then came back and built the adobe, so you've got stuff from multiple time periods, and they'd been there for quite a while, and so it's just a lot of stuff that just sort of told the story of, you know, their lives there and over a period of time, you know, with different sorts of diagnostic artifacts. So it was really fascinating.
No, that's really cool. You had to, you know, shed light on something and actually go there, have this whole, you know, a team of documented people that are really invested in just, you know, reprioritizing this history. So I'm glad that one that happened, and two that, you know, you all actually found some things and help create a better, clearer picture of what the draw used to look like. Could you state your first and last name, how to spell that for us for the record?
Michelle Slaughter, Michelleughter.
No, I'm just I'm taking a moment of just this amazing picture that we have right now of just like an original resident of the Dry, and then her descendants and family, and then someone that's been part of like the literal excavation to highlight this history and bring it back into the forefront. So I'm just like blown away with this, like in this room of like this team of people who are really working hard with a lot of intention to make sure this story just, you know, stays where it should be. So.
And it's good that you're here because she's like the last person that has homestead, that everyone else is gone pretty much.
And we tried desperately to find other folks who had lived there and descendants, and it was hard. And a couple of people we did find that live up.
Talk a little bit about your mother's efforts to promote the history of the Dry when she was alive.
Well, Mother lived the Dry and knew the Dry. I would say that Lulu, my grandmother, uh, who was a teacher and more scholarly, was more involved in speaking about the history of the Dry and the accomplishment and the reason for coming and the reason for staying. Uh, Mom had the longevity, and Mom was a worker, and Mom would stick to things, but Grandmother Craig was the visionary, the dreamer, and the one who kept up with the history of it. Though Mom was the last one there, and before she moved here into the town of Manzanilla. And of course, she knew everyone because she went to school here and got acquainted with many of the people who remained here and were here when she moved back into town. But I would say Lulu was the one that encouraged all of us to know about our surroundings, to know about our background, get educations, be contributors to society, be a part of society, be known as a mover and a shaker, and somebody who was trying to accomplish something, and be somebody, and be knowledgeable, and be involved. That was all Grandmother ever talked to any of us about, was go out into the world and equip yourself so you can make your own sunshine, so that you can be somebody. And there are a lot of professional people in our family, and I think that is because we were told that by her and by our parents. Get an education, so we have teachers and we have medical professionals and people who are in mental health and work. Jay's job was to work with people who were disabled and who needed counseling. And Richard's a nurse, Margaret's a nurse. I'm a teacher. I have a cousin who lives in Lahana, who was in Darlene, who was a teacher. Doris was a teacher. So we had a lot of educators in the family, and a lot of medical professionals and social workers. So contributing to the community and the world in general.
I really like that part about making your own sunshine. I think that the world needs a lot more of people who can make their own sunshine. That's great. Michelle, I want to talk to you a little bit about, you know, your first impressions of the dry and kind of what it means from your perspective to stumble upon this finding.
I think my first impression actually going out to the dry was probably very similar to the first impressions of the folks who settled there, because it is so remote and flat and dry and there are very many trees. It's very stark, but you know, I stumbled on the story about the drive because of another friend who works out here, and she told me, have you heard about the drive? I was like, no, and she was doing a project, but it was outside of her project area. So did a little research, and it's like, how does nobody know about this? Does no one know about the dry? And, you know, meeting Alice, this project could not have happened without Alice, because she's just a wealth of information and very gracious with that information. So for me, I keep referring to it as a project, but it's never been just a project, because it's, you know, it's about people's lives and people who are still here and have their own memories of the place. So this was very much a collaboration, and I was just lucky to fall into it.
I think the work that she did too put a highlight or a spotlight on the dry and on our family. It just got the ball rolling about the historical value of it and getting everyone focused on it and knowledgeable about it. Because like she said, there was, even locals didn't really know, or they didn't know where exactly it was. And then my mother would give talks, and there would be so many questions from the audience that listened, and that was really interesting for me to hear the questions that were asked, the interest.
And were you surprised at how many things you found? You were talking about that earlier, about how just like you're finding, like, you know, coal bins and like wood, you know, just the material you found there.
Yeah, as an archaeologist, you know, we look at the landscape differently than most people do. So a lot of what we see, other people probably don't even notice, and it probably doesn't mean anything to them. But out at the dry, you know, something for me that was very sort of poignant and interesting were the trees that are left. I don't think any of them are still alive.
Yeah, there's that one stump that my grandmother planted.
But, you know, there were no trees initially, and they planted the trees and nurtured the trees, and it's just such a symbol, you know, of like wanting some shade out of the dry, but also just fortitude and, you know, doing what you need to make things happen. Have you talked about Noah Smith?
No.
So this was one of my favorite things. We were working on one of the homesteads for a man named Noah Smith, and knew that he had been married, and we were doing archaeological survey at his homestead, which means looking at the ground and covering just every inch of the homestead, looking for artifacts and features and trying to figure out what it looked like when he was there, and what can the artifacts tell us. And what was really interesting is we knew he had been married, but we were not finding any artifacts that suggested there was ever a woman out there, which we thought was strange, because you would expect to find something. and mentioned it to Alice, and she said that, yes, Noah was married, but his wife had come out and decided that life at the Dry was not for her, and went back to Denver.
Yeah.
And so Noah divided his time between here and there, and so, you know, as archaeologists, it's you find things or sometimes don't find things and interpret as best you can, but for a project like this, having someone to go to
Mhm.
and say, what does this mean, and getting a concrete answer is so
Perfect,
exciting.
yeah. That's what it's all about, that communal support of an
Right.
organization,
Right.
you know, getting on that level of community and having community fill in the gap. So that's a perfect example of how it should work, you know,
Exactly.
ideally.
I agree.
No, that's great. Well, any other like little snippets like that of things that you guys
Well,
have
she
worked on?
mentioned the trees,
Mhm.
and because there were no trees, and the bulk of the people who moved there had been in areas where there were a tree, they all said, well, let's plant a tree. And I remember Mother planting the tree, and she had asked someone that lived here in the valley, and they said, oh, plant an elm. They're native to Colorado, and that elm will grow, which is quite true because they're everywhere. So she planted an elm tree, and it was just a little tiny thing. And we knew that it needed water, so we had a real large hole dug around it. And whenever we would haul water for the cattle, Dad would stop by and he would pour water on the tree. When we washed dishes, we poured the water on the tree. When we took baths, we poured the water on the tree. Any water we had, we put it on the tree. When it snowed, we packed snow around to be sure there was plenty packed around the tree. And the tree grew to be as large as any of these that you see out here, out on the Dry. And Grandmother Craig had 2 little walnut trees, and they grew, and finally one day, after she was gone, had moved away, and we went to look. The wind had blown and blown, and the little trees no longer were getting any water, and they had fallen down. There's a tree that stands at Dode's house, but it's dead. And there were 2 at Aunt Barbara's homestead. And whenever I would go out just to walk around and look on the Dry, those 2 trees were still alive. And there was an eagle that had built a nest in one of the trees. And every year she would come back and lay her 2 eggs and hatch 2 little eagles. And when you would walk out there after they had hatched out, they would hear the footsteps and they would put their little heads up and start making noise. It was amazing that we would never see the mother, but I knew she was around somewhere. She wasn't far away, so we never went too close to the tree.
Mhm.
But I went one year after in the spring, and I said, well, I think I'll go out on the Dry and take a look. And the wind had blown and blown, there was no water, and the trees had blown down. So they all planted trees, but even now the trees are gone. At our house, there's just a large stump that's left. When the vandals burned the home, it burned all of one side of the tree. So one side lived for, a few years before it finally died. So now there's only the stump that's left.
Wow. And you said there's a fire? I've heard a little bit about that, but there's not a whole lot.
Well, there were homesteads left, and over a period of time, the vandals burned them. They burned our homestead, I think, first, and then they burned Aunt Bottle's homestead. Hers was an adobe house, so the adobe dirt still piled there, but it burned the wooden frame. And then one of the ranchers had taken the side off of Grandmother's house. But he asked when he was running cattle, and it made a good shelter in the winter, and when it was winter and blowing. But they even came and burned that shelter down. Just kids out drinking beer, I guess, having fun.
That's what I was gonna say. I was like, has there been like any repercussions of anyone caught out there starting fires, or is it just
Well,
kind of
they
just?
didn't know who it was,
Mm.
and Nothing was done about it, no.
That's
She was there at night. Who was there at night? You know it's done, and it's burned, and there was no way. I remember when Mother's house was burning, one of the farmers that was about a mile away, he's in Patterson Valley, could look and see it. And he knew she was living here in Manzanola, and so he called her. And Mom was always very practical. She said, well, what are we going to do about it? You know, there's no water. And if they take the fire engines, they'll take a tanker. By the time they get there, it will probably be burned. Anyway, so she said, go back to sleep. And I'm going back to sleep too.
Wow. It's tough. Yeah, that's. I mean, but she's right though. Yeah, to a lot of extent. Yeah, it's like, what do you do at that point? Well, yeah, that's about all I had. Before we kind of wrap up, feel free to mention anything you guys think I left out or that needs to be said. But I definitely want to hear from each of you of just kind of why should people care about the drive? in just the briefest sense, like why should they care? Because part of this is we're trying to prioritize history and show people like, hey, like this matters. So like I just want to hear from you all, kind of a short answer. Why do you think?
Well, it was covering Black history and what has been accomplished by those people who moved here. They came and for a good reason, and they stayed as long as they could stay, and made homes, which is what they intended to do. They couldn't make a living, so they moved away. However, our family stayed, and instead of being farming, we did ranching, and we had cattle, and we had pigs, and we worked hard. And if you lived out there, you worked hard. You had to have perseverance and strength of character, and I think they had all of that. So to me, it's important to point out the fact that people came to an area that had not been lived on that much before and had attempted to make a living, and some did stay and make a living, raise their families, and live there until they died. And that is what our family did, and so it's important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like for others to know that it can be done, and has been done, and if necessary, can be done again somewhere.
So connecting it to not only our present, but also our future, saying that, we took land that was, barren almost and dry and, marked uninhabitable, then, we turned it to an extent as much as you could, and the elements would let us. So that's, yes, it's definitely a story of resilience and perseverance, for sure.
Well, and for so many Black Americans, what we see over and over and over again is lost history, whether it's here in Colorado or somewhere else. And for me to know that there is so much history available to our family, and to know the strength of our roots, and to see that strength and that resilience in generation after generation, to know that Aunt Al, Mama Alice, she just so freely gives of that information to anyone who asks for it, so that it doesn't get lost, that it doesn't blow away like the dirt and like the dust. And to know that it still calls us back. Here we are. Here she is. Here we are. And even the generations that are coming after us, she mentioned the family reunions that we would have for Graham's birthday, and even the ones that come after us that are in their 40s and 30s and 20s, they still long for this place. And so it just has such a draw. The love, the hardship, the legacy, and to know that it's ours. And to encourage other people, to remind people that people matter. History matters, not just American history, but family history, Black history.
I agree with what my mother and Jay both said.
Do you have anything you want to add?
I guess I would just add that it seems like people think they know Colorado history and that it's all about mining in the 19th century and skiing in the 20th century and 21st century. And there's just so much history that people aren't aware of and should be aware of. And if we don't tell the stories, how will anybody know?
Yeah, no, it's true because I've been in Colorado since September, and coming out here hearing that they have Black people in Lincoln Hills in the dry of like fishing and farming and skiing, and like it really changed my perspective of like my spectrum of Blackness. I was like, while Tulsa was burning, there are Black people here in Colorado who were building like Deerfield, things like that. So it's really crazy just to have that perspective, to like you said, to know that like we were everywhere, and American history is Black history, and vice versa, and how like we're all in this collectively to get to where we are now. I was gonna end it, and I thought of a question about the fly swatters. Is just stuck in my head for some reason. I just wanted to bring that up a little bit about some of the chores that you all would do in the dry. So you were making fly swatters.
You
talked
remember
about it.
making
Yes,
them?
yes.
Using
Wire mesh.
coat hanger and
And the
wire
mesh,
mesh.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Graham's taught all of us, because there wasn't any water, but there were plenty of flies. And so, sitting out the flies would be a nuisance and pesky, and there were the cattles, and so there's flies, and the chickens and flies, and so we all learned how to take a coat hanger, how to take wire mesh, and how to cut out the proper size square, fold it over, and learn how to take wire or heavy string and sew it so that we made our own fly swatters. We didn't buy them, we made them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of like a little game or a pastime, who could swat the most flies, and how good you were at swatting. Like our grandfather, we would watch him, he'd just be there, and he was so quick. And then sometimes we'd get spankings too. With the fly swat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's multi-use tool.
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Man, that.
Are you pretty good with a fly swatter now?
Yeah.
I am too.
Well, I'm just trying to think of just like because again, there's the idea today of kids going somewhere for a summer, and like you said, it's like go there to play. But then even then, looking at you all's past of like the play was different. It's very swatting flies for a sport.
But we did play baseball, because our
Every
grandmother
night.
would fix up a little diamond, and we would play baseball like after dinner. Or we would do something always after dinner. We would have to go outside and play or do something. We didn't have cornhole, but we had fly swatting.
We had croquet that we
Yeah,
would
we had
play,
croquet,
and horseshoes.
And
But
horseshoes,
almost
yeah.
every single night after dinner, we would play baseball. And I can remember that Grams played with us every night until she was in her 60s. And I remember the night she quit, we were out playing, and she always helped us settle and pick teams evenly. But Grams hit the ball, and she took off running. And she hit first base, she hit second base, and she was coming into third, and the gravel got out from underneath her, and she fell. And she got up, tagged third base, got on home. But after that, Gramps left baseball to us, and she was
She retired.
still our biggest cheerleader, though, and we still played every night.
Yeah.
But I know what falling at 60 is like. It feels a whole lot different than, us falling at our age, So, yeah, Rich is right. I mean, and Gramps made sure that we had things to do, and making the fly swatters, slingshots, torches, stilts, croquet. I mean, when people find out that we play croquet, it's kind of like, but Gramps made it fun. I mean, and if we got in trouble, I mean, you would go and you would sew something. I made my first pair of pajamas in kindergarten on a sewing machine.
Wow.
But Grams, I mean, even when we were being rerouted, disciplined, I mean, she used skills to teach us during that time alone and that time of reflection. So, yeah.
Well, so was baseball a big leisurely game played in the dry, or what were you all doing when you weren't farming or trying to find water?
We played baseball, and I think the baseball was something that they did do. And I remember before my time, but when the original homesteaders came, um, they would have picnics, and whenever they had a picnic, they would go down on the Highline Ditch, which it was right before you go into Patterson Valley. And at that time, there were lots and lots of trees and grassy land. Since that time, the ditch companies have taken out the trees because they draw a lot of water from the ditch. So they have cut the trees down, and as you drive along those ditches now, there's nothing. But during their time, it was beautiful to go down just to the irrigation ditch canal there, because there were a lot of trees and grassy land, and they would have their picnics there. So I have pictures, you know, where they had gone there to have picnic gatherings.
Yeah, I love those group photos of the picnics. Wonderful.
Baseball, fishing, picnics, anything else you all did for leisure back then?
Oh, well, during the winter, we made snowmen and snow ice cream. Then we had lots of snow.
Mm-hmm.
And snow on snow, so you could always dig down and find some clean snow. Now I wouldn't dare go out and get any to make ice cream, but we made a lot of snow ice cream. That was always great fun, and it was always good because we used the cream. We were milking and separating the milk, so we had cream to use in our snow ice cream. And of course, during the summer, we had a ice cream maker, and we would freeze ice cream. I remember one year we were making ice cream, and it was for Dad's birthday, and it was June 18th, and it snowed.
Wow.
There we were freezing ice cream, and the snow was coming down. It didn't stick because it was warm enough, but it did snow.
No kidding.
Uh-huh.
Wow. In June, too.
In June 18th.
Wow. I love that, like, you know, like you said, June 18th, you remember to the day.
I remember.
of?
It
Like,
was his birthday. We were making ice cream,
Yeah.
and we all found it most amazing and amusing. We didn't even go in the house. We just kept right on. Mom said it's not going to last long, and it didn't.
That's great. That's great that you know your memory's still intact and you're able to share these stories. Like I said before I had that question, that's kind of all I have. I don't know if you all have anything else you want to make sure we know about the dry or anything like that. But yeah, I'm good with my questions unless you all have anything you want to add.
Well, I think one thing that the drylanders found interesting was the hailstorms that we have here in Colorado. I don't think they were that familiar with them otherwise, but the hail would come and break out the windows and take off the roofs, and really was something that they always talked about and certainly didn't look forward to, because those big hailstorms could be very destructive. And Mom always raised chickens, and I remember she had 100 chickens and had used the back porch for their house. And when the hailstorm came, why, we were in town, and Mom said, well, I'm positive when we get back, all the chickens will be gone. But amazing enough, all the little chickens ran into the house, and only one was slow getting in, and the hail had whacked him and killed him. But it had broken out the windows and taken off the roof. And they went into town and bought new shingles and cleaned up the roof and put on the new roof. And I think in about 2 weeks, another hailstorm came and took the roof off.
Wow.
But Mother could hear the storms coming when we were at home, and she'd say, hurry and get the wood and cover the windows. I hear a storm coming. You could hear the roar of the hailstorm coming. It would be cloudy and there would be rain, but it would come, and you'd look up, and it comes, and it's like a large white swath that just moves across. and there's always that sound that precedes it. So if Mom was there and she would tell us, hurry up and board up the windows, so we'd cover up the windows. There's nothing you can do about your shingle roof but let it go. And if it's big enough stones and coming with enough force, they'll just cut them off.
Wow. Well, that's what I was going to ask you is how would you know if the storm's coming? But it sounds like you just know.
Yeah,
you kind
you
of
know.
get that sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You get that sense when
Wow.
you live there.
Did you ever have tornadoes out there?
No, never. The only tornadoes that we have in this area are south of Hunter.
Okay.
And they'll skip across that land, maybe find a barn or shelter for wind shelter or something, but never in our area.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's impressive. No clan activity or tornado.
No, neither the two.
Wow. Well, no, thank you all so much for your time for this. This has been great. I mean, I feel like everyone in this room really understands and values the importance of preserving and promoting just our history. So I just thank you all for your time and for coming up here. And yeah.
Well, we're pleased that you're interested and concerned and doing some valuable work. We were always glad
Thank
when
you.
Michelle and her group came. So,
Yeah, no, this is definitely one of the stories that one of the ones I want to shout from the rooftop is just trying to find the best way to do that is to make sure that it's lasting, it's intentional. We don't want to just say, oh, look at this thing and then never talk about it again. We want to set up some things in place so that we can routinely bring this up and kind of make it a mainstay of our content.
well, one of the activities that we had that did help focus on the drive was the celebration of my grandmother's birthday. Happy birthday, Mrs. Craig.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes on television, usually around Mother's Day. But Harry Belafonte Enterprises covered her birthday, and they came out and filmed it, and it was called Happy Birthday, Mrs. Craig.
I've heard of that film. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm aware of it. It's on my list of things to do, but it's for good things.
Was that 70, 71?
72, I think.
72.
I'm not positive.
It was in the 70s, what do you remember?
I think it was 72, but I'm not positive.
I'll check that out.
Yeah, it's worth watching.
Yeah. Where is it now? You said it comes on every once in a while. Is that just on like PBS Rocky Mountain or?
Or sometimes you can find it on YouTube. See if I can pull it up.
I've been able to find snippets, and I know they
Yeah.
use it in, at least they were still using it in African American studies
Mhm.
Mm.
in different universities.
You can buy it online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.
I think the original person who made it, I think, is the person still selling them.
Mhm.
And we gave copies to, gosh, which libraries? I think La Junta and,
It'd be curious to see if we have any in our collection too.
Happy birthday.
because, yeah,
Mrs.
we
Craig.
did, we bought a few during the project to give to local libraries so that they'd be available down here. I don't know if we gave one to History Colorado.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's great. Like I said, anything we can find to help shine a light on this story, just like this, is so great. There's been so much here of like, oh, find it.
Yeah.
The entire thing's on YouTube.
I don't think it's the entire thing. I think it's still trying to load. I think it's probably just a snippet. But
Okay. Yeah, I'll do some digging. I'll see if we can pull up. Surely,
But-
we can find something.
that was Lulu. That was my mother's grandmother.
Okay.
Our great grandmother. And it's still loading, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
I saw the image and then and then
Yeah.
started up. No, that's
See, yeah. So that's how the movie starts.
Mm,
It
wow.
has a picture of the
Wow.
drive.
very flat and dry.
And Marguerite narrated.
Narrates.
Narrated.
Okay.
There's a big tent, but you can
Wow.
find it. I
Yeah.
pulled it up on YouTube.
Y'all check that out. Yeah.
But I don't know if it's the main. I don't know if it's the whole.
Mhm.
I don't think it's on
It's
there.
not, it's
And
just a portion
she's the
of it.
one with the 109th shirts, right? That's her.
No, she lived to be 104.
Okay, gotcha.
And Grandma
109
Craig,
shirts with my mother.
Okay,
wrote
gotcha.
them.
her mom. Lula was her mother-in-law.
Gotcha.
No matter how much education you had, it wouldn't help you if you wouldn't use it. So you have to use it every minute.
That's
No.
what my mother was saying.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll definitely find
This
that.
is her. This is Jay's dad. That was her dad. But you can see it.
That's awesome. It's very 70s.
It's total 70s. Oh, yes.
No, that's great. Yeah, it's like every other day about it, I find some new thing. I'm like, oh, add to the list of books or movies to watch, and I got a long list to try to catch up on the history here.
And she tells the best stories.
Mm-hmm.
She
That's what we
is
told
a
us when we here.
remarkable storyteller.
It's true.
I'd ride anywhere with her just to be with her when she talks and shares.
Yeah, and I think I've read about most of the stories you said here in some form or
Yeah, we
fashion.
did a Colorado experience on the Dust Bowl, and I was with a couple of other people, and we also did one called Home on the Prairie, and they were in several areas in Colorado. That was fun, and we talked about Colorado and Colorado history. There were a number of people that shared their experiences.
You said it's called On the Prairie?
Home on the Prairie.
On the Prairie.